Efforts to legalize recreational marijuana use for adults in Hawaii has failed in recent years. So what's different this year? A new governor who says he's open to legalization. But before any measure even reaches his desk, it still needs to be voted through by the legislature. And it's unclear if lawmakers are ready to embrace reform. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanji Denise. Pot, weed, ganja, reefer, however you refer to marijuana, the movement to legalize various forms of it has increased in recent years. Many states, including Hawaii as well as the federal government, have decriminalized smaller amounts of possession. And medical use marijuana has been legal here for more than 20 years. But so far, Hawaii lawmakers have not been able to legalize recreational use despite the potential gains in tax revenues. Our panel tonight will discuss the pros and cons and if legalization is prime for passage this year. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Deputy Chief Keith Horikawa oversees the Honolulu Police Department's patrol and investigative bureaus. He's been with HPD for 29 years and spent more than a decade as a narcotics investigator. He's also served on interagency task forces with the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security. Democratic State Senator Joy San Buenaventura represents District 2, which covers the area of Puna on Hawaii Island. She is the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee and has introduced several bills relating to cannabis this session. Tai Chang is the founder of Aloha Green Cannabis Collection, a state-licensed medical cannabis dispensary. He's the current board chair of the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association and is also an attorney who advises clients in the legal cannabis industry. And Greg Chapkus is the executive director of the Coalition for a Drug-Free Hawaii. The mission of the nonprofit organization is to reduce and prevent drug abuse in Hawaii through awareness, education, and action. Thank you all for being here tonight. We appreciate you appearing with us in person. Senator, I want to start with you. We did mention at the start that this is a governor who is amenable to signing recreational marijuana. What are the bills that are currently in progress right now, and how likely do you think it is that one will make it to his desk?
Super high as far as any cannabis bills. But we have about 15 Senate bills and an equal number in the House. And the main ones that we're looking at is, of course, full-on legalization, decriminalization of 1 ounce, going from vertical to a horizontal regime, which is basically allows for small growers to be able to cash in on the marijuana dispensary system by being cultivators and having cultivation licenses. And of course, some kind of middle ground. And we also have, some cleanup measures which allow, during COVID, for instance, people were not allowed to leave their cars, so the dispensaries would be allowed to provide the cannabis so long as they have a 329 card to somebody who is in their vehicle, and other cleanups like transportation, to be able to have minor amounts to transport it from one dispensary to another.
Okay, and Mr. Chang, I want to ask, as someone in the medical industry, how would that affect how would that affect medical cannabis if recreational cannabis was allowed to be legalized?
Well, the program has been growing over the last 5 years. Each year there's been some small change or measures that have been adopted to improve the medical program. When we first started about 5-6 years ago, I think the legislature and the people of Hawaii weren't really sure of how they were going to allow for the dispensaries to sell cannabis to patients. Now, with adult use potentially coming up, we know that the medical program is in a good space. It's operated for 5 years now without any incident. There has been no diversion, as the Department of Health was worried about. There has been no deaths that have been related to the sale of cannabis from our dispensaries, and there's been no injury that's occurred to patients over these last 5 years. And so an adult use regime, if it were to come to Hawaii, would drastically change how the medical program would operate, but it's important to know that we still believe that there should be a medical program that remains in Hawaii so that patients who are relying on medicine are still able to gain access.
Wouldn't a recreational full legalization, if that were to pass, wouldn't that sort of kill the medical industry?
So one thing that the industry is pushing for is to have medical sales untaxed. So there would be no tax, just like how prescription drugs are not taxed now. So we would instead apply a 10% excise retail tax for adult use cannabis plus the GET. So effectively almost a 15% tax on any person 21 and over who's willing to come into the store and purchase cannabis. But for medical patients, we would hope that because they require this as a medicine to treat symptoms and alleviate pain most of the time, that they would be able to purchase without that tax.
Okay. Chief, walk us through a little bit of what the law is now. I think a lot of us are confused. I know that I am in terms of what decriminalization means versus full legalization. We know that small amounts are legal right now in Hawaii. So tell us the process. If you come across somebody who happens to have marijuana on their possession, what's allowed currently and what's not?
Right. So as far as like possession, like on a small scale, anything under 3 grams, which pretty small amount. I mean, a packet of sugar is about 4 grams. So anything below 4 grams, it's a violation. So it's not arrestable. We do cite that person, and the fine, would be really a maximum of $130 for a fine, and of course no jail with that. When you get into higher amounts, then it does become criminal. So anything more than 3 grams and under 1 ounce, it'll be a misdemeanor. Anything between 1 ounce and 1 pound would be a full misdemeanor. And anything 1 pound or more for possession-wise, it's going to be a Class C felony.
And as a law enforcement officer, what's your view about the bills that are being debated and the idea of full recreational use?
Mm-hmm. Well, as a department, we do oppose the legalization of recreational marijuana. Really, we don't see any societal benefit for recreational use. I mean, it's there's aside from the individual user, we see more problems for society, whether it be quality of life, safety, traffic safety, attendant crime with that, more impacts on that regard.
Okay, Greg, I want you to weigh in on this. What are your concerns?
Well, a couple of the public safety concerns are, there's more impaired driving, THC impaired driving deaths. And there was a recent study from the Department of Health, our Department of Health here, and it was kind of pre-medical and post-medical marijuana, and THC-involved fatalities practically tripled from before, from after. And I think a lot of the other legalized states see that too. But from our perspective, as a youth-serving agency, it's just really about youth access and the developing brain and what cannabis can do to developing brain. And I think a lot of people don't understand the marijuana of today versus the marijuana of maybe when anyone here might have been in college or something. Back when me or my dad or my grandpa was in college or high school or whatever, if they had a shot of tequila, it was 80 proof tequila, it was Jose Cuervo or whatever. But when I was college days, maybe in the 80s, it was probably 3% THC, and that is not a legal marijuana dispensary. Probably couldn't even sell 3% THC marijuana. No one would want it. It's up to 30% now for the best stuff, and then there are the derivatives beyond that, which go up to 90% THC. And these are the things that are really hard on the developing brain of adolescents and on anyone, and it can cause psychosis and mental health issues, and I think that's really concerning. I think most people really don't understand what the cannabis of today is versus yesteryear.
The bills that are being debated, though, right now, they are for adult consumption, not for youth. I mean, I think everyone on the panel would probably agree that it's not appropriate for kids. So given that it would still not be allowed for children, tell me about why that's still a concern.
Just because it's not allowed doesn't mean they're not going to do it, right? And so for prevention, so we do prevention programs, and it's access and attitudes towards drugs. And we see as legalization continues, attitudes and perceived risk of marijuana has gone down. But even last time we did this show with Bill Hanning on here, and all the the brain development people will agree that the adolescent brain doesn't stop developing until 25 for women and 28 for men. And so it's still not done developing completely. And we know kids drink, and we know they access marijuana today, and they'll get to it if it's legal.
We can't just put our head in the sand and believe that children are not going to be using cannabis just because we don't have adult use legalization. The black market, the illicit market, is supplying drugs to children. Like, they're at playgrounds, they're selling it. A medical dispensary, we don't sell to children under 21 unless their parent or guardian is there to treat, most of the time, epilepsy and other symptoms that they have. But a child under 21, if we look at California, when they legalize for adult use, they have almost 100% compliance rate for IDing and allowing only 21 years and over adults to enter their dispensaries to purchase cannabis. The rest, where did they get their cannabis? From the illicit market. And so really the fight here is against the illicit market. The industry is proposing and supporting regulation, tough regulation, as well as education. Education to help prevent children from taking up and using cannabis at a young age, and also educating so we can stop people from drug driving, because drug driving is illegal. It doesn't make it legal for you to use cannabis, consume alcohol, and drive a car into somebody. But if we can educate people about, yes, this cannabis is not your grandparents' cannabis, you need to be careful in how you use it, it's an intoxicating substance, and you can use it responsibly, then the state can garner $80 to $85 million in new tax revenue.
And what Ty is saying is correct. The biggest problem I think the legislator wants to do, and it's not to open, when I say super high as far as probability, because we have all of these regulations that we want to open up. What's going to be more difficult is whether or not we're going to have any kind of adult use. Okay, it's still with over 30% in the House, brand new. We don't know where they're going to vote. And we still have some conservatives over in the Senate. The adult use recreational is still going to be a tough sell in the legislature. But I have the kind of regulation that Ty is talking about, I'm all for. I mean, we don't want the diversion to the children. We do not want the drug driving, okay? We do not want, but we still do want to ensure that when kids do need it, like epilepsy, that they do have the ability to do it.
And don't they have that now, or is that not, are the protections not in place enough now?
They have the ability to a certain extent, okay? But cutting back on the illicit market, you're gonna need regulation in order to cut it back, because if you keep, it's like prohibition. Whenever you say no, there's gonna be a huge illicit market elsewhere. When we have, I hate to say it, I was there during the time when we opened up to the 9 dispensaries, 8 to 9 dispensaries, and because of the vertical model, it seems it's like a monopoly. When we pushed that model through, the Department of Health was supposed to slowly increase the number of dispensaries to about 25, 26. It never happened.
And why is that?
Department of Health said they don't have enough time, and they were really super concerned about diversion. And the dispensaries, I hate to say, kept saying that they kept losing money. And so why are we having more dispensaries when the existing dispensaries are losing money just because of the seed to sale type of tracking and and I admit the amount of controls we have on our existing dispensaries are high compared to other dispensaries on the mainland. But that's the reason why one of the bills is to push for horizontal, to spread the cost, to ensure that not only to spread the cost, but to spread the profits, if any. And in order to be, I'm hoping, okay, me personally, and I think also the House Health Chair is also looking at the same thing, is the reality is there's going to be adult use, because there is on the mainland. But we need to open the door slowly. We need to ensure that there is no diversion to the kids, that we do cut down on the illicit market, because our police force has a huge vacancy rate. We don't want the kind of high criminality that we see elsewhere. So,
well, let's bring in Ivar from Hawaii. Kai says, since we can't control the illegal fireworks, I don't think legalizing marijuana will produce any legal ramifications. People will do it if it's legal or not. I mean, what about that argument that this is already happening and that if it were regulated through, even through a recreational market, that there would be more controls? Do you see that argument, and is there any validity to that argument?
I mean, obviously you're going to have to impose, new controls when you legalize, for recreational use. But, like Ty was saying too, I mean, there's going to be a black market. It's been proven in other legalized states. Pretty much, the black market would not be subject to, whatever kind of state taxes would be involved. So, and they're going to feed a market that could include, juveniles as well. So we see, illegal cannabis production and distribution to continue in that regard. And
it'd be like if we could manufacture our own fireworks here in Hawaii and then they were safer and that we would sell them through licensed outlets, then yes, maybe you could reduce the amount of fireworks that are illegally brought into the state. And that's similar to how what we're trying to propose is that if the dispensaries are able to get to an economy of scale where the price is lower than the black market, then it's not worth it for the illicit market to pursue those type of drugs to sell. They move on to other things. Like there's other things. If a criminal's a criminal, they'd rather do some crime that pays instead of competing with a dispensary that's selling a $5 gram or a $7 gram of cannabis, which is not much for them to make at the end of the day.
I think in the legalized states, though, that hasn't borne out yet. I mean,
it hasn't because of high tax rates, though. Because of high tax rates,
in 2018, California produced about 12 million pounds of marijuana, and they sold legally, I have it here, less than 2.5 million pounds, And I think it happens in every state that the black market is emboldened because once it's out there, you can't tell whether it's a legal product or
yes, you can
illegal
with tracking.
product.
If there's tracking, you can find it. If there's QR codes and barcoding, then you can tell if it's legal.
Colorado, they've had the cartels not have to import marijuana. They move into Colorado and they set up shop there and they start producing and distributing in the state.
California collected $50 million in taxes last month from adult use sales.
Well, let's talk about
Colorado
the money.
collected $20 million last month, and Washington collected $70 million in its first year of adult use sales.
Let's talk about the money. We know that you were on the joint task force on this, legalization issue. The task force found somewhere, I believe, around $50 million would be the annual state benefit. There's a lot of argument as to what that money is. What do you think the potential tax benefit could be? Governor Green, when he was campaigning, I believe he set upwards of $400 million. I don't think that anyone is going there now. But what do you think is the tax benefit for Hawaii, on an annual basis, reasonable?
So I agree with Ty on this. I think the joint dual-use task force was basically pretty conservative because we were looking at the kind of controls we had given the few dispensary licensees we've had.
That's right.
So because of those type of controls where the costs are high, and you have to remember, because it's still a federally illegal drug, they cannot deduct the business deductions that normal businesses can and do. And as far as their sales, they have to also be careful. They cannot accept credit card sales. But if we have the ability to have the kind of recreational dual use that we're looking at, I'm expecting it to be more than the 50 million. Yeah. I'm expecting it to be more like the 70 or so because Hawaii is also a tourist state. We're also going to allow for people to use it recreationally in a controlled setting, adult use, okay? Because we do want to make sure that there is no diversion. When we entered into this dispensary market, we always wanted to ensure that our kids are safe, that there is no diversion. And I hate to say that that's the reason why the dispensaries have the kind of prohibitions and the kind of restrictions they are going through now. There is no mold in their marijuana. It's such strictly regulated that far more so than any other dispensary on the other states. But that doesn't mean that we should only have these 9 dispensaries. We should be able to open up the market more, and as soon as we open up the market more, I believe we'll be able to make some money.
We've done economic reporting, and our recent estimates put it at between 410 to 430 million in sales in a adult use market. And if we go with our introduced bill, SB 669 or HB 1216, we're proposing a 10% excise tax as well as the GET, and that would equate to about $82 million in new tax revenue for the state. And so I agree, it'd be somewhere between $50 to $80 million.
That might have been the $400 million.
Yeah, I think the $400 million, other people have also predicted that amount as a total amount of sales, and that's a conservative amount. I think previously, as you've seen 10 years ago when Colorado and Washington were legalizing, they came up with these huge numbers, these windfall numbers. We're much better as states now in tamping down those expectations and picking a number that is reasonable. But we always underestimate drug use. People, when self-reporting, don't like to tell other people that they consume cannabis or any other drug in particular. National data puts it at about 12% of adults use cannabis. In Hawaii, it's actually about 14%. We just completed a survey of over 600 Hawaii local residents, and we had the usage rate, someone using cannabis within the last 12 months, at 16%.
16%.
16%.
What about that financial argument? Whether it's $50 million, $80 million, $100 million on an annual basis, that could go to a lot of good in our state.
It could go to a lot of good. You're right. But I mean, we could do a lot of things for money. We could sell things, legalize things. I mean, I think a public safety and public health argument should come first, not how much will we make, but really should we do it in the first place? Is this the healthiest thing we can do for our state? Is it really the healthiest thing we can do for our kids and for our families? Is it the best thing we can do for our roadways? There are bills in the legislature to reduce the blood alcohol content so we have fewer impaired driving deaths. There are bills for vaping and regulating vaping better because the kids are vaping like crazy. And we have all these things that are trying to protect our health better, and then we have this one that we know is just going to have an opposite effect to it. And so I just don't think it's worth it yet. And yes, maybe I think decriminalization is the right thing to do. It's good for all the social injustices and to keep people on possession out of jails and stuff like that. But it's going to be about our workforce too. What kind of workforce are we going to have in the future? If these if kids have substance use disorder, especially related to marijuana, whatever, less likely to finish high school. And what kind of workforce do we want?
But I agree with Greg. If you look at the vape and tobacco issues that we have with teen use, we're not saying let's make it illegal, let's make vapes illegal. We're saying let's regulate it. Let's make it so that it's difficult for children to get and make sure that whatever vapes are being sold are safer for children and safer for the community in general. If you say, let's just make it illegal and let's just put it in a black box and have the deputy chief here run around and arrest everybody with it, the criminal organizations are just going to get better at doing what they're going to do. At the end of the day, it's not like there is no cannabis use and that if adult use were to happen, that cannabis use is going to just explode and everyone's going to
decriminalization solves a lot of that. And we look at the legal, what do we have? We have a tobacco settlement, right? That was legal, and we know they lied to us. They had their own scientists and stuff like that. Now we have the opioid settlement coming in, another legal product, but they had their ways about doing that too. And I just think, tobacco is heavily invested on a national level, on a global level in cannabis. And one of the former Purdue pharma execs, he's in cannabis now too. And I just think it's just not the best thing. If we're a health state, it's not the best thing for the health of our families and for our state. And I don't know, I haven't checked with tourism, but I'm just curious if we really want a lot of stoned tourism too or not.
Yeah. Let's talk about the driving issue. Mona from Hawaii Kai is saying, if someone who is high and they get into a car accident, are they automatically guilty of a DUI? Will injury victims in a crash be able to hold the state liable? My guess on that second one is no, but let's talk about what happens when someone is drug driving, so to speak. How can you tell, given how long THC can stay in someone's system, how can you tell if they are under the influence of cannabis at the time? When this issue comes up, again and again, people talk about safety on the roads.
Right, so unlike alcohol, drunk driving, we can't measure with breath or at the scene. But what we can do is, of course, even like the alcohol cases, we do look for indicators of intoxication, and that's what starts the process. When they go through the test, the examination for that, whether it be looking at their eyes, the horizontal gaze nystagmus, or different indicators, sometimes it doesn't. Person under the influence of a drug might not fit the alcohol indicators. So what we have is these highly trained drug recognition experts throughout our department. They go through a lengthy, like a 2-week training, pretty intensive course, and they're trained on how to recognize indicators of certain kind of drugs. So, for example, intoxication under alcohol would be a certain set, and the same thing for marijuana or meth. So different indicators. So based on their assessment of that, they can be arrested, for OVUII or that offense, and it does hold up in court.
And the penalty is the same as being under the influence of alcohol.
Yes.
Do you worry that more people would be under the influence of marijuana if it were legalized recreationally?
Yeah, absolutely, and studies have shown that with other legalized states that the level of or the amount of arrestees for other type of drug for marijuana intoxication has gone up.
Most of the time, it's a combination of alcohol and cannabis. Cannabis use on its own, according to epidemiology study, shows that there's only a 1.5 chance increase in a fatal car crash. Alcohol is a 16 times chance of getting into a fatal car crash with alcohol use. And if you mix cannabis and alcohol together, you have a 25 times chance of getting into a car accident. So there is a whatever happened when it gets, compounding on each other. So it's not always just from simple cannabis use, it's from a mixture of drugs at the time that people are driving. But drug driving and operating a vehicle intoxicated is illegal in every single state in the United States.
Okay. Senator, what is the argument, do you think, for doing this? I mean, take the tax revenue out of this. Why is this something that's appropriate for our state?
Because we're moving people from an illegal state to a more regulated state. Okay, and I'm going to give an example. At the time when I first ran for office, before we passed the medical marijuana dispensary bill, my district had the highest number of 329 cards. After we passed the medical marijuana dispensary bill and more dispensaries were opening up on Oahu has gotten it more. So I'm assuming that those people with the 329 cards were getting their getting their marijuana illegally. So we have moved them from putting money into the illicit trade into a legal state. And by decriminalizing and by opening it up a bit more, we regulate, and hopefully we can reduce the illegal market even more. We're hoping that the amounts that they're going to be charging, because we are opening it up more, going into horizontal, reducing their cost, will then bring more people from the illegal market into the legal market. And we're starting to see that on the Big Island, because the cost there of producing medical marijuana by a couple of the dispensaries is lower than here on Oahu. So we're seeing some of the people who are growing their own going from the illegal market into the legal market. And so that's one good reason to do that. Because when we get them legalized, we're able to control it. We prevent the fentanyl deaths. We prevent the adulterated type of marijuana, causing these deaths. And we're hopefully be able to control the diversion to kids or any kind of diversion. So that's one reason to do it, aside from having the tax revenue. The tax revenue, I gotta say, we need to have, because we're looking at a recession, and in my committee, the medical services providers want GET tax exemptions. There are a number of people who want GE tax exemptions, and we need to have revenue to counter all these GE tax exemption bills.
Well, I want to stick
adding
with
to
you.
the senator, we did our poll at the end of December this past year, and we found that 86% of Hawaiian residents support legalizing cannabis. So there is a demand for it by the people that they would like to move forward. It's happened in 21 other states in the United States where there is adult use sales of cannabis.
Yeah, I think they support it when you ask the question the right way. But again, I think most people just don't understand cannabis today. I think they don't understand that it comes
It's
in
cleaner
that it comes
and safer
that it comes in
than
gummy bears,
20, 30
that it comes
years
in
ago.
pot
It doesn't
tarts
come in
and-
gummy
and
bears. It doesn't come in
not,
forms
maybe
that are
not
attractive
here,
to
but
children.
it does nationally. It does, right?
In illegal black markets, it does. Criminals make
In Colorado,
products.
they don't sell THC gummy bears.
They make them without that. In an adult use market, they allow for images of there's ears and things. But here in Hawaii, we're only allowed to produce in a non-discrete form. So a circle, a square, that's it. We're not allowed to make anything that is attractive to children. There's only black and white packaging with only words, no images are allowed. We have some of the toughest cannabis
take that as-
dispensary laws.
all right.
So there is a way of doing it right, and there is a way in doing it wrong.
But,
I don't
but even the
disagree with you
dabs,
on
though, what percent THC are those?
it depends. Sometimes 60, sometimes 90. But there's all these other
90%
cannabinoids that are
THC
built
versus
inside.
a 3% when I was in college.
Well, let's
Right?
get
It's cleaner. What you smoked in
30%
college.
THC flower.
What you
versus
smoked in
3%.
college had pesticides, fungus, and mold. I guarantee you that.
Okay, let's get to some more questions. And Senator, we'll take this to you. Ralph says, I think the state should explore legalizing marijuana to subsidize more local agriculture. Legalization could lead to more jobs and more local growers. How will you talk about opening this up slowly. What are some of the controls that you would put in place to, take an idea like Ralph's and make sure that you are creating jobs here at home?
Well, that's the reason we were talking about going to the horizontal, to allow growers to be able to sell to existing dispensaries, increase the number of dispensaries, so that way local growers, basically, my district, we grow, okay? But they don't have the controls that the Department of Health requires them. They probably have mold, traces of pesticides that blow in from somewhere else that regular, legal, regulated dispensaries do not have. So by giving them cultivation licenses, the idea is they will be required to have these controls so that then we will have the kind of unadulterated marijuana by small growers that hopefully will be able to filter out and reduce the dispensary costs and increase the monies for small farmers. So I think it's a win-win. I agree with the questionnaire.
Okay, I want to give some questions here to Ty, and these are pushing back kind of in line with what Greg is saying, and just, because I know that you have a lot of data, so I'd love for you to
Sure,
answer.
I just don't want to get too much
Joseph
data.
from email says, with all the downsides of marijuana and practically no upsides, why take such a chance with our stressed society, which already has problems with homelessness and an uptick in crime? It makes no sense. Annie from Waikoloa saying, we already have enough problems with housing availability and homelessness. When Oregon legalized it, many people move there. If that happens here, it would put an even greater strain on our housing crisis. I don't know that I can tie those two together, but what about this one from Joseph to say that there could be an uptick in crime or homelessness? Some of the, people are worried about ripple effects that come when they see increased drug use. How do you answer that?
There's, increased crime, common prohibition argument that's put out. There's mixed findings in legalized states. It's not clear whether or not post-legalized states actually have increased crime. Almost all of them track national crime rates anyways. And for example, Ohio saw a reduction in crime after it legalized. Colorado, Washington were both steady at the time. The National Bureau of Economic Research in 2021 said that there was little evidence to suggest that any type of adult use legalization increases the use of any harder substances or increases violent criminal activity in that state. So it depends on what you look at it. I think some people feel that because it was a drug that's been prohibited for such a long time, to allow for it into their lives and to allow us to accept it's difficult. I think it's difficult. It requires education. And one of the things the industry stands for is to regulate, educate, and tax. And the education portion is super important. If there are people who show symptoms and signs where they do have an addiction or they do have issue that will affect their lives, there should be help. The Department of Health was supposed to educate and provide an education component with this medical cannabis program to help patients understand how to use the product properly. but they haven't done so, right? And if we do an adult use program, it's very important that we have education programs to dissuade youth use and teenage use, and to educate people that it is an intoxicating substance. And like you said, it's not your grandfather's, cannabis from 20 years ago, but you have to use less. You don't use as much as before. Just, the 30%, 90% cannabis. It doesn't matter if it's 90%. I could take something that has 10% cannabis, 10% THC, and just smoke 9 times as much of it, and I'm just as intoxicated and unable to function as if I was using something that was 90%. So in the end, it's about education and having people understand how to use this properly.
Given that it will still be illegal at the federal level, where does that put law enforcement? What kind of a position does that put you in? I know that you're there, of course, to enforce state law, but does that create any kind of conflict for you?
Well, we still do, investigate and enforce federal laws. I mean, we're part of, we have task forces, federal task forces, part of the HAWAIʻI initiative that we're part of. But, again, kind of going back to that previous question as well, I mean, to me, I question, what is the real societal benefit to legalizing marijuana? And especially in Hawaii where, like the question did mention, we have societal problems with homelessness, with homelessness, there's attendant mental health issues across the board, substance abuse issues as well. So to legalize marijuana, I think a couple of things. I mean, number one, I think the perception would be that it's fine to use. There's probably no harm. So that would probably encourage more use in a situation where I think Hawaii really doesn't need it, especially with just driving here, past how many homeless camps here, right? That's not going to help that. And with some of the attendant crime with that, we have problems with some robberies of drug houses as well. I think that's going to increase and continue. So so for us, we just see more problems and really no good societal benefit for that.
Janelle via email has a question. Senator, I'd love you to take this one. What about the will of the people? If over 80% of the Hawaii population wants and votes for legalization, when does that come into play? When do the people get to decide? What are the conversations like that you're having? You don't have to name names, but I would love to know about the debate that is happening about that, given that what appears to be the majority of people in Hawaii would support some form of legalization.
I have always been the forefront of legalization and decriminalization, but I'm also realistic as to the 75 other people in the legislature and what they have to come into in order to get elected within their specific districts. Unlike Colorado and most other states that have legalized marijuana, we do not have a state referendum. We do not have the ability for the people to actually vote and make this legal. So it's really up to the people to vote for pro-legalization politicians in order for this to work. And right now, the calculus is sort of 50-50 as to whether or not we do have the ability to pass full-on legalization. But I do believe we have enough to pass a partial legalization of recreational.
And what would that look like?
Like I said, what we're looking at is basically increasing dispensaries, maybe calling them retailers instead of these dispensaries, allowing for the horizontal cultivators to come in so that they'll be able to make some money out of this, but still allow for law enforcement to have the kind of controls to prevent diversion.
No, under that model, would you still need a medical marijuana card, or could anyone go into these facilities?
It's dual use, right?
So it is dual use. So anybody could go in there.
So, that's what we're looking at. So
that sounds like legalization to me.
Not complete.
Okay.
Not
Explain.
Complete. Full-on legalization would allow, for us to open our doors to everything, just like what you see in Colorado. So anyone with a GE tax license would be able to sell, sort of what they're doing with CBD now. But in order to prevent the kind of diversion that the Attorney General and law enforcement are concerned about, because we don't want the FBI to come in and shut us down. And that's always, because when Colorado went full-on legalization, the DEA and the FBI did come in once in a while to set in controls. We don't want that with our dispensaries. So we want to have some control, but also to open it up so that more people will be able to, take advantage of marijuana, would be able to see ensure that the marijuana is unadulterated, and would ensure that the kind of marijuana that they get is the kind that will hopefully be more helpful rather than cause them to, have overdose, like if they are fentanyl or crystal laced or adulterated kind. So we don't want that.
Greg, does that kind of what I would see as somewhat of a compromise, would that strike you as an okay balance, or does that not work for you and your organization?
Well, I like the thought of the control, because I don't know how it is in Denver now, but when Colorado first opened up, they had and I think this was a big deal. It's like 2018 or something like that. And in Denver, they had a combination of McDonald's and Starbucks. They had over 100, but they had over 300. 3 times as many dispensaries.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I live in Kailua, and I wouldn't want that many dispensaries there, and I'm sure we don't want that many dispensaries in Waikiki, right, for all our tourists. I mean, that's a tough balance. We've had some issues there, and in Chinatown, we need the controls for sure. But it's still, again, is it the best thing for our health, and do we really need to do this? I think there are other ways to either, we've had a couple centuries of balancing budgets without legalizing marijuana. I think we can still do it.
So the industry believes in a phased approach, just like the senator has pointed out. We want to roll it out slowly so that Hawaii can assess the risks that are occurring. 90% of those polled in the same poll want regulation. They want a limit on the number of dispensaries. They want a limit on what can be sold. They want these rules in place so that there is some type of safety and some way of regulating the industry. Once we get it going, we can always loosen those restrictions later on if we feel that there are no harms. And to start, we should start with something that's regulated and something that is safe. And
so not the full-scale legalization, just anybody
if we're able to do that,
marijuana.
that would be wonderful. I think that that would be the right thing to do. But that's maybe something that is impractical to do, and something that couldn't be done here in Hawaii at this current time. Even though we do have a governor who is amenable to signing an adult use bill, we might not have, as Senator said, enough legislators who were willing to stand behind.
As a physician, though, I know he's cautiously amenable, and I don't know if there's any physician group that's pro-legalization. I know the American Academy of Pediatrics is full on against it, and because they take care of kids and they know better.
But physicians believe in harm reduction as well, and the illicit market is causing much more harm than a regulated adult use market.
Explain that. What do you mean?
In an illicit market, there is no checks and balances. There is no lab testing for the product. The senator had mentioned already the cost of our product and the cost of the medicine we sell. The reason why it's so high is because we have video cameras covering every square foot of our production center, recording video for 30 days at a time in high definition. We test every single product that comes out that is sold to individuals. Sample, third-party independent testing on all the products are done. A full array of yeast, mold, pesticides, chemicals, heavy metals, moisture content. It's one of the strictest testing regimes in the United States. It was a mixture of Oregon standards as well as Health Canada standards.
But as a result, the dispensaries, from everything I've read, aren't really making any money.
No, that's right. None of them are making any money. None of the dispensaries that I know of have returned a cent to any of the shareholders that have invested in their businesses.
Right, so really opening up the recreational market would allow for
some recoupment. That we do believe there would be some recouping of the cost, but I would say for my dispensary, Aloha Green, we spent upwards of $17 million to build out our 3 dispensary locations and our 70,000 square foot grow close to the North Shore. And so will I make back $17 million in 1 or 2 years of adult use? I don't think so. I don't think the sales are that high. The $420 million that we estimate for annual sales is with a mature market, so a market that might take 2 or 3 years to build out.
You know, he brought up that in their surveying, somewhere between, you know, either 12 or 16% of Hawaii residents are already using this drug. There's a resident from the Big Island writing in, my concern is for those who are mentally ill adults. I have personally been around mentally ill adults who smoked cannabis and witnessed their exacerbated increased paranoia and exacerbated symptoms in them. What are your, I mean, if 16% or 12% of our population is already using this, what are the effects that you see when you encounter someone who is on marijuana? And do you share the same concerns as the caller?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, like I said a little bit earlier, you know, I mean, we already have problems with, you know, mental health here in Hawaii that's tied into homelessness and, you know, substance abuse as well. You know, I think that 16% is probably accurate. I mean, we do see a lot of drug possession in our arrests that we have, which are tied into different offenses. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any. I think with recreational legalization, I think that problem will probably increase.
Well, what about the argument that you know, that Ty brings up, that this is, you know, very controlled, the way that his organization is producing this product? You know, there's no fentanyl laced in there. That it would be a cleaner drug, and that there might not be some of the harms that we see. We hear a lot. I mean, we could do, and we probably have done shows on fentanyl and opioids and all these drugs that are entering the market illegally, and that maybe this would supplant some of that use. Is there anything to that?
I mean, I think it's admirable, you know, goal to go after as far as that, but I'm not convinced that the illicit black market would go away. I mean, I think the black market still would have. I think that's all driven by demand, and I think the demand would be for more potent marijuana. Like, you know, often we see indoor grows with the marijuana grown hydroponically, and with that, you know, they can control, or they can kind of like design the level of toxicity or THC content in that. So I think with that, I think that would still create a demand for the black market, and as well as to avoid some of the taxes as well. So for me, I don't see that marijuana black market going away, and so I think it'll still be tied into some of that.
I have a good news story from 2019 when there was this Vapegate incident. There was these cartridges on the mainland, cannabis cartridges that were making people sick, and people didn't know why. They later found out that they were cutting cartridges with vitamin E acetate. Vitamin E acetate it's totally fine when you use it on your skin. It makes you beautiful, but you cannot smoke it. You cannot burn it and inhale it. Because Hawaii's black market, or the illicit market here, is not extremely sophisticated in having, you know, the extraction methods that, you know, some organized crime groups do on the mainland, there wasn't very much black market cartridges here in the state. And the cartridges that were made by the medical dispensaries never had vitamin E acetate inside them. So there actually was no cases of that type of lung, that popcorn lung, or that, you know, the damage to the lung that occurred here in the state of Hawaii, because we had a regulated program, and also because we don't share a border with any other state that allows for easy black market smuggling of cannabis. But that's one example of how, you know, because we are an island, because we can control, you know, what's being done, that it is a benefit to society at the end of the day.
We've gotten some practical questions here, Senator, about just whether marijuana would be treated the same as cigarettes, let's say. If marijuana was legalized, could there be a prohibition on the method of smoking? If not, would this have the same restrictions as tobacco smoking? And there's some other questions in here. There's a nice pile of questions. We appreciate all of you participating, but that this could, you know, the secondhand smoke effects, if you will. Would the same regulations apply? Could you smoke marijuana outside, or how would that work?
So basically, those types of questions are happening now, really, over at the Hawaii Public Housing Authority, and this fugitive smoke, like people who live in condos don't like it when other people, their neighbors, are smoking. They don't care whether or not it's tobacco smoke or whether or not it is marijuana smoke. They just don't want the smoke. So the high likelihood is yes, just like tobacco, there are going to be regulations as we go along. Again, that's part of the idea of this phased-in approach. And I think I think we got enough in both House and Senate to be able to pass a phased-in dual-use approach as we move towards a full-on legalization, if we even get to that point, depending upon, consequences, whether or not we have high death rates, or whether or not, we actually are able to reduce the black market or increase it. But that's the idea of hoping to have a phased-in approach, is hopefully we can have these types of bumpers to ensure that we don't want to have the mafia here in the state of Hawaii. We want to be able to control it for the state, for the consumers of the state, for the farmers of the state.
Okay, and I want to give this question to you, Greg. It says they glorify alcohol, and that is way worse than marijuana. I don't think that you do that, but I don't know what the big deal is about marijuana. This is from a viewer. What is the big deal about marijuana?
Well, one of the things I've been saying is it's just so much stronger than it used to be. Again, 40 years ago, Jose Cuervo was 80 proof, and a joint was 3% THC, and now a joint might be 30% THC. And we just don't fully understand the effect on the developing brain, but there's mental health issues. For instance, suicide right now is the #1 cause of death for like 10 to 18-year-olds in Colorado. It didn't used to be. THC is the #1 drug. Toxicology reports on suicides in Colorado. We just don't understand it all. And I think we talk about the revenues, but we're not looking at all of the costs. We're undersourced in the Department of Health, so they can't do everything you want to do and raise all the dispensaries. We're undersourced in the police department, right? And we don't have. We think if we legalize it, then they won't have to deal with, arresting people and stuff. And that's not the case at all. It's just We've had tobacco, we've had opioids. We just really don't need another, I think. And that's that, and the developing brain and the high potency of THC is just, yeah.
We're almost out of time, so I want to make sure that I hear from all of you. What's your counter to that?
As I said, this is why Cheech and Chong were smoking joints nonstop. It's because it was only 3%, but it didn't mean that they weren't smoking enough cannabis to reach the levels of whatever THC concentration that were in their blood. When it comes to teen use and I have children, I wouldn't allow them to smoke cannabis. They're 9 years old or 12 years old. I would want to see a regulated industry that says, no, you can't come into the store, you can't even buy this until you're 21 and over. That is much better than having my children play on a playground and have someone approach them and give them some type of substance, or even just sell them, cannabis, because it's easier to buy than alcohol. Because alcohol, you need to walk into a store and at least get carded to receive that substance. So I think that, regulating, educating, and taxing is the best course for the state of Hawaii.
Let's hear your thoughts.
Again, I think that legalization, I think the messaging tied into that is that, marijuana use is okay, and I think I have kids too. I don't want them to smoke, but with the legalization, once they turn of age, I mean, they could very well feel that it's not a bad drug. So I would not like to see that. I think that our current laws and the way it is right now is good. I think it's again, I don't see the benefit in going down the road of legalizing marijuana just because it feels good, because it's a recreational drug. I think there's more problems tied into that. Again, like I mentioned, just the effect on quality of life. I mean, just the smoke itself. Man, I had a neighbor that was smoking marijuana, would come into my house, and it's terrible.
That's pretty bold.
You're a cop. Oh my gosh. Was it me? Was it?
Yeah.
I hope it wasn't me.
But
okay.
And with that, I mean, just the impacts on our homeless population, just on crime in general. I think, to me, it's like, risk management. Why do we even have to take the risk in going down that road?
Well, we have about a minute left, Senator. I want to give you the last word. Why is now a good time for this?
Because everyone else is doing it, and why shouldn't we? No, not necessarily that. But the reality is people are smoking or people are using marijuana. And we need to put in, like I said, the bumpers and the regulations. We want to make sure that what they are ingesting, whether or not it's smoking or whether or not they're inhaling or ingesting, is safe for them. And it's safe for the kids that are using it for medicinal purposes. And we want to make sure that there is no diversion, because the illicit black market out there is huge. So why don't we legalize it and tax it?
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Mahalo to you for joining us tonight. Of course, we thank our guests here in the studio, Honolulu Police Department Deputy Chief Keith Horikawa and Tai Chang with the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association, State Senator Joy San Buenaventura, and Greg Chapkus of the Coalition for a Drug-Free Hawaii. Next week on Insights, after multiple scandals among state and county leaders, we are asking, can government corruption be stopped? We'll discuss what's being done to improve transparency and deter deceptive behavior. Please do join us then. I'm Yanji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Until next time, aloha.